my session. I know that there's a lot of competition, and some people would like, there's many things to go to. It's always a difficult choice at a conference, but I guarantee this will be a good one. Yeah, you made the right decision. So my name is Ken Beatty, Dr. Ken Beatty. I've got a PhD in computer-assisted language learning that I did with David Noonan. I write a lot. I write a lot of textbooks for Pearson. Thank you, Pearson, for sponsoring me today to come all the way to Japan. For Pearson, I've written, I think, 72 books now, but about 148 books altogether. Some of them very, very small, but still books, yeah, so it still counts. So I'm kind of on two sides. I'm kind of on the research side, where I try to think, what are we doing? And I teach graduate students and doctoral students. And at the beginning of this morning's first plenary, before the plenary, Catherine and Richard said something about this idea of introduce who are your inspirations, or who helped bring you here today in some ways. And I was thinking about that, and of course there's a long list of people that I've worked with over the years, but there's also my students, my graduate students, because now I'm kind of like many of the older people here today, old professors, no longer teaching first language learners, second language learners. I'm no longer in a language classroom. I teach doctoral students and graduate students who are all teachers. But they are the ones who are feeding me. And as I go around the world, and I'm in 12 countries this year, as I go around the world and talk to teachers, I also get that inspiration and those ideas. I talked to a teacher last week in Mexico, and actually she was at the conference Mex-TESOL, and she was from Nicaragua. And I said, so, I know you're a teacher, but how do you describe yourself? What do you do? She said, I touch lives. And I thought, it's beautiful, yeah? Beautiful, and that's what we do. So little lessons coming from all directions. Let's imagine that we've got a time machine. Imagine that we had a time machine and we could go back into the past a little bit. Let's see, if we went back 100 years, what would we see? Well, if we went into a hospital, we would see things that were very, very different. In fact, a doctor from 100 years ago would have enormous difficulty walking into an operating theater today. The first thing, what do you mean I have to wash my hands? I washed my hands last week, why would you have to do that? So many practices, approaches, technology, everything has changed. Everything has changed. What about teaching? Well, if we went back to teaching 100 years ago, we'd probably find, once we got there in our time machine, that things were really, really not that different. And many teachers from 100 years ago would come today and would say, oh yes, just walk to the front of the class here and start talking, open the book, teach the materials. But things are changing. But they've been that way for a long time. Even if we went back 2,300 years ago, this is the education of Alexander the Great by Aristotle. We see the same dynamics. Teachers talk, learners learn, and somewhere they have some sort of materials that provide expertise. So what's changing? What's changing today? That's what we're sort of interested in. And I'm going to start off today and divide the talk into three sections. First of all, talking a little bit about technology and some very practical ideas, I hope. But practical ideas based on the research. And after that, I'll talk about efficacy and agency. So we'll bring them all together in some ways here. But let's start off by talking about some ideas around technology. So I'm wondering how many of you have one of these at home? Does anybody have one of those at home? No? Nobody? Really? I'm shocked. Okay. Well, we'll get to that in a second. But some teachers, first of all, this is our first of the 5 lessons. Some teachers always oppose technology. They're always against it. They say, technology terrible, right? I don't want technology in my classroom. I'm doing just fine the way that I am. And so there was this one, this invention will produce forgetfulness in the minds of those who learn to use it, because they will not practice their memory. Do you think this is true about phones? We don't practice our memory. How many people say yes? We're losing our memories because of phones? Yeah? 1, 2, 3. How many people say no? Oh. And, sorry, how many people don't have any hands? Yeah. It's okay, I'm not judging you, I just wanted to know, that's fine, okay. Well, in fact, this was not written about phones. This was Socrates talking in 370 BC, and he was actually talking about books, not phones. So this idea of having a teacher who opposes technology, that is not new. People have opposed technology for years. What's the second one? The more things change, the more they stay the same. So this invention, fantastic, fantastic. It was a book wheel, 1588. It was invented. Imagine the convenience. You sit at home, you have installed your book wheel in the living room, and you're reading your book, and you think, it's a new word. I'll just go to my dictionary. And so you roll it around, and you go to your dictionary, you get the word, and then you think, oh, I'm a little bit hungry. I'll go back over to my recipe book and something like that for dinner, right? Stupid, very stupid. You could put about 12 books on it, right? So maybe not that efficient. But what's interesting here is the principle. The principle has not changed. We still want one of these book wheels. The thing is what we've done is we've put them onto our phones. So on my phone, I have 150 books, Why? Because I travel a lot. I want to go back and forth. I read a novel. I don't want to carry around 10 books in my suitcase, not with airport fees the way that they are. The third one is that technology becomes invisible. This is William Gibson, not an educator, but rather a science fiction writer. Now, William Gibson said technology becomes invisible, and it confused many people. What did he mean? Well, he means this. Think about the lights here. Think about the lights. When you walk into the room, and turn on the lights, what do you think? Nothing. You don't walk into the room and say, now, the room is dark. I shall summon electricity from the mountain stream to come through wires to the city, into the building, all the way to the switch where it will flow into the glowing orbs above us. Click. You don't think that, right? But that's what's happening. In fact, we've forgotten the technology part of it. And really, we're forgetting about all the conveniences of the computer, all the conveniences of the phone. We just take it for granted. We just assume it works and it will work, and we don't have to understand how it works. So that's changed. The fourth one is that technology without pedagogy is useless. We have to have some kind of a theory to support what we're doing. If we don't, then the teaching falls apart. The learning falls apart. How many people have used Duolingo? How many people have used Duolingo for more than 3 weeks? Really? Fantastic. Yeah. Do you have shares in the company? Yeah? No. In fact, there was a lovely study done in South Africa, and that's what they said, 3 weeks. Everybody starts it, nobody goes after 3 weeks. Why? It doesn't really have a solid pedagogy. It just teaches you vocabulary. There's little beeps, you didn't get it, and that becomes very irritating. And after a while, you think, am I really learning this language or just memorizing some more phrases? It's not really that useful for people. It doesn't address their particular needs. It's a great achievement technologically, but it's not a pedagogical model that we can work with. The fifth one has to do with something that Prensky says. Prensky says that we can have a choice. As teachers, we have a choice. We can do old things in old ways, old things in new ways, and or we can really make a jump and try to do some new things in new ways. Now, what does he mean by this? What does he mean? Well, essays. Okay, everybody take out your feather quill, no, I mean your pen, and we'll write an essay on paper. That's old. We've been doing it for 500 years. Hasn't changed a great deal. Old things in new ways. Okay, everybody take out your laptop, and now we'll write an essay by typing on the keyboard. It's still mixing up the old essay, even though we have a new way of doing it. What Prensky's really talking about is how could we do something absolutely new with, say, the phone, but a new task, not writing another essay or writing a paragraph or doing something else, but actually use the phone to do something new. And that's what I want to talk about now. So let's take our time machine into the present and maybe even a little bit into the future to look at some of these ideas. So I'd say that the phone is the future. It's a different technology than a laptop. Why? Well, when I started off teaching 100 years ago, I had one computer in the classroom, that was on the teacher's desk, and the students would come up one at a time, and you do a little bit on the Apple II, green type, only capital letters, amazing. And then gradually, some students started getting computers at home, then laptops came around, half the students had them. But even just a few years ago, there was always a digital divide in the schools. And in my own children's school, there was always 3 or 4 students who never had a computer. Some by choice, some by choice. I lived on a small island. There was a lot of hippies, right? So a lot of these hippies, you know, they just totally opposed to technology, so they just didn't have it. So there was always this have and have not. But now every student seems to have a phone. Do any of your students not have phones? Yeah? One. Okay, one student doesn't have a phone. Really? Your students don't have a phone?
Some of them don't.
Really? Amazing. Yeah. Are they kindergarten students? Yeah, yeah. All right. Okay, but it's becoming the norm. It's accessible technology, and the best thing about it is it continues to update, and it's a common platform for many different applications. So it's a lot different. Now, teachers don't like it. They don't like it for many, many reasons. But instead of fighting against the telephone, we should perhaps embrace it as a technological tool. So I'd like to talk about 7 different ways in which we can do that. 7 sort of different options for that. Let's go through these one at a time. I won't read them out now. We start off with the first one, is to communicate with other English language learners around the world. I don't mean phoning them up randomly, say, hi, are you an English language learner? Ni hao, ni hao. No, okay, next. I'm not saying that, but of course using text messaging, online things, sending them emails, stuff like that. But how do you contact them? How do you contact those students around the world? Well, at this conference, if you meet somebody from another country, you know, that's a good starting point in some way. But you can set up pen pal arrangements with other schools. Where's this? Anybody know? World travelers? Spain? No. Belgium? Yes, it is the capital. It is Bruges or Brussels. Yeah, Bruges or Brussels. Okay, very good. Fantastic, fantastic. Why do I have a picture of Brussels there? It's the sister city of Nagoya. It's a sister city of Nagoya. Actually, Nagoya has many sister cities. So what can you do? Go to the mayor's office, call up the mayor, and say, dear Mr. Mayor, hi, our school would like to have an arrangement with a school in, and I would choose not an English-speaking place like Los Angeles, but I would choose the ones where English is the second language, so the students also are at the same level and wanting to communicate, like Mexico, Turin, Reims, Antwerp, Shanghai, or Brussels, all of those. And then put the schools together, so contact them in some way. Now, I say pen pal, but nobody's going to write letters, pen pal letters anymore. But they are going to text, they're going to email, they're going to blog and vlog, video log. So again, you start creating this, the point. What's the point? Well, the point is that it shifts responsibility to the students. They form relationships, and some of those relationships go on for a long, long time. And they develop those over time. I was, 3 years ago, I was in Monterrey, Mexico. I went to give 4 days of workshops for the teachers there at the Monterrey Tecnologica. And so I'm talking to the director, who is actually from Poland, moved to Mexico, fell in love, never left. And so he was the director of the institute there. And I said, well, yes, I'm from Bowen Island. And then I was in Bowen Island. It's just a small island, 25 square meters, 4,000 people, very close to Vancouver. He said, oh yes, I've been there. I said, what? Like nobody's been there, It's like some of my own family haven't been there. What do you mean? And he said, oh, when I was in Poland, I had pen pals all over the world, and then I continued to develop them, and I traveled to many of the places to meet them. So again, it's an opportunity. In that case, it's a perfect example. And of course, he was a great language learner who became a great language teacher, who became a director of a department. But it's a possibility there. The second one, capture language use inside and outside the classroom. Everywhere you go in Japan, I see English. Fantastic. It's so easy now, I think, for a foreigner like myself to come, and it's really, really easy. Everywhere there's all sorts of English signs. Not always the case in some countries. You're trying to find the washroom, looking at different names, and you can't figure it out. But here there's a lot. I just recently moved to Montreal, and again, just walking around the streets, and somebody had done some sort of an art project, or I don't know, it was something about feeling good about yourself, I think. And they made all these heads and just put them up on the wall. So you say English, and you get the students to take photographs of it, like a treasure hunt, asking them, go out, take photographs of this, and then bring it in and talk. One of the big principles is to get every student doing something different. Stuart Brand, 2008, talked about this idea of 30 students reading one book. He said, no, he said what should happen is 30 students should read 30 books. You go from a competitive environment into a collaborative environment. So that's what we really want to do, get students doing different projects and bringing those projects together. So another opportunity for capturing language is to record a conversation. So again, your students are walking around with these phones. They're fabulous video machines, and they can walk around with those and actually just, if they see someone, say, oh, excuse me, could I have recorded a short conversation? If they happen to meet somebody who is a native English speaker, or if they're on holiday, if they're traveling, if they're somewhere outside the country, whatever. It's a good one. This was in Bolivia 3 weeks ago. I was in Bolivia, and you can see his t-shirt. Bolivia is saying no re-election. It was the president was re-elected. Actually, I think this guy has to throw out the shirt now. Yeah, too bad. This is one that I saw just earlier this week in Tokyo. I was so excited. It said the romance car in the subway. I thought, wow. I wonder where do I get my tickets, right? Yeah. I thought this was fantastic. All right. Unfortunately, my good friend and graduate student Aviva Ueno, with whom I'm presenting tomorrow, Aviva, said no. It's just actually more room to sit. You get a guaranteed seat. Everything else. So crushed me. Okay, what can happen here? You could ask students to just find examples and explain them, things that they think that foreigners might find difficult or English speakers might find difficult. Or you could do something different. You could say, okay, well, let's take this idea, and I want you to write a short story about someone who really believes that it is an opportunity to find romance. Somebody comes all the way to Tokyo. They're lonely. They're away from their family. They haven't met anyone. Suddenly they see, the romance car, right? And they get on, and of course they fall in love with someone. Write that story for me. So again, it's a jumping off point, getting students to do something different. So here's the romance car. I sort of imagined that. Yeah. That's the cover of the story, I think. Okay, describing the world. So again, the phone is such a great tool for documenting the things that we see. We're always looking around, we're always seeing unusual things, and things that are very transitory. So I've been to Mexico City a few times, but this last time, all of a sudden they had these massive skulls all over the seats. I'm seriously, they're like this high. They're this high, and each one was painted differently by a different artist. So each of those artists had, and then they had all been arranged on this one street, Reforma, right in front of my hotel. So I went out, I was so interested to see all of them because they were variations on a theme. You think about what a language lesson this is, and each one is different. Each one is a little bit different. And so I would have a class where I'd collect these and say, okay, what's the differences? Everybody take one, try to describe it, and then talk to the other students and see what's different about it. Again, I'm going to say this a few times, but I'm a very lazy teacher. I don't do anything if my students could do it instead. And so you shift responsibility onto the students. This is the students' job to bring in photographs like this, but once they do, they're digital. You keep them forever. With my own graduate students and doctoral students, they hand in their papers. Fantastic. I take the best one each year. At the beginning of the next year, I give the best one to the new students and say, this is what one of the good students did last year. I expect you to do better. So what am I doing? I'm giving them a template. They see the expectations. I don't have to say, I want you to do A, B, and C, all these different things. You have references, do everything else, have an introduction, put in an abstract, give it a title. I don't have to say any of that. I give it to them. I say, that's your model. Make sure you're copying the format with your new content in it. And then when they hand in their papers, and I get their papers and they haven't done that, I said, have a look. I just give it back. I said, have a look at the model essay. What's the difference, shifting responsibility, again, to the students. But getting these digital resources, you have them forever. Fantastic. Describing art. Yesterday I had the good fortune to go to the Nagoya City Art Museum here. If you get a chance while you're here, it's fantastic. And in the lobby they had this huge sculpture. I mean, it doesn't look so big, but really it's about 20 feet high or something, and it had all sorts of interesting little features. Again, art is an interesting one because we ask too many closed-ended questions. We say, what is the capital of Japan, right? You know, and it's boring. It's boring. The interesting question is, why is Tokyo the capital of Japan? With art, we're doing the same thing. It's open-ended. Say, what do you see? What do you see? Why do you think the artist did this? What is this about? What does it mean? Actually, I think for some reason it's something about capitalism. There's a lot of dollar signs and things like that on there, but you have to go to the art gallery and see it yourself. The fourth point that I want to make is this idea about analyzing language. Analyzing language, and this is the simplest of all of them. It's a very, very simple thing to do. All you do is ask students to find something, to listen, to record themselves saying it, to repeat. Now, what do they choose? Not my problem, right? You know, I don't care. It's up to them. They can choose a speech or an advertisement or a commercial on TV. I don't care really even if they did a song or something else. But what they're doing is they're listening, and then they try doing it, saying it themselves. Then they listen to the recording of themselves. Is it the same or is it the different? Well, what are we doing here? We're turning them into critical thinkers. They're examining their discourse and seeing whether or not, you know, the pronunciation, the intonation, everything else is working. I don't have to monitor that. I don't have to sit in class listening to them to do that. I'm not asking them to record it and send it to me. They can maybe do it at the very end of the class, but it's their responsibility to learn, their responsibility to do it. Moreover, we need to give a lot of strategies to students, and give the opportunity for those strategies to be developed into skills. What's the difference, strategies and skills? Strategy is a conscious attempt. You're thinking about it. And we learn strategies in one of three ways. We either learn through observation. We see somebody else holding a pencil, writing. We think, oh, I can do that. You know, so you pick up a pencil as a child and you do it too. We learn it through instruction, where the teacher says, hold the pencil like this, make the letter A. There's a big loop, something like that. The third way that we learn is problem solving. You give students a problem. And for adult students in particular, this is the most interesting approach. You give them a problem, let them solve the problem, and then they can learn through that. They develop the strategies on their own. Okay, number 5, create some sort of multimedia projects. So I think Tanabata, is this the name of these paper wishing trees? Tanabata, is that the word? Yeah? I speak Japanese perfectly. There we are, yeah. So I've seen examples of this in different places, including there was this one woman who I was just walking through a university one day, and she turned out to be a secondary school teacher who was doing a project on poetry. And she was writing sonnets with her students, her teachers that she was working with. And a sonnet is an old poetry form that Shakespeare used, and it has 14 lines, and there's 10 syllables per line. There's a couple of other rules to it, but that's the basic idea of what a sonnet is. So what was interesting is afterwards, she wrote them onto these leaves and then hung them on the tree. It was quite interesting because depending on where you started, everyone would read a slightly different poem because you would read the lines out of order, or you could try putting them into more of an order. But it was a very, very kind of an interesting exercise, I think inspired by this Tanabata sort of idea. There's a lot of other things that we can do. I love poetry. I love literature in the classroom. Why? It's because literature is forever. Literature is long term. If you interest your students in reading poetry and reading short stories and reading novels in English, they continue to educate themselves over time. So it's not just a short-term thing you do in the classroom, but you try to inspire them in some ways. And one form that I love is, of course, is haiku. So here's my little poem about Nagoya, right? perfect. You know, Nagoya's leaves drift like ideas in the wind, settling on our minds. There we are. Okay, so in English at least we've got this 5-syllable, 7-syllable, 5-syllable format. And what does that do? It's a constraint. The constraint forces creativity because the students have to figure it out and they have to think, oh, I could use this word. Ah, it's too long. What's a synonym for this word that would fit? And so they're actually doing a lot of things, and it's a kind of subversive teaching. Subversive teaching is when you have a certain idea, an objective, and you know the students are doing something, but the students just think they're writing a haiku. You know that they're struggling with synonyms and meaning, they're counting syllables, they're doing pronunciation, there's a lot of things they're doing. They just think they're writing a little poem. But we can take this further. We can take this further in different ways. And this is one way that I was just actually in the mountains of Colombia 2 years ago. And I was staying at a hotel, and you can't drink the water there, so you have to have bottled water. I ran out of bottled water, so I got my money and I went out to buy a case of water, basically, so for my room. And when I went out, there was a woman sort of standing there at the stoplights. Now, in Latin America, throughout Latin America, this is very, very common, where people are entertainers, and the light changes to red, and they run out and they do juggling or something like that, or they'll balance a bicycle on their nose, or they've got a dog that jumps over their heads, or all sorts of little things, entertaining just for a minute. And the light turns green, and they stop and they walk through and they collect with a hat a few coins. So a lot of people, especially from Venezuela now, who've had so many problems in their own country and they can't get a job, a lot of them do that. So this woman was a torch juggler. So I thought, wow. So I went up and I talked to her, and I said, you know, I talked to her and I just took a picture and stuff, and then I wrote a little poem, a little haiku. So I said, juggling time and fire, weaving minds of travelers into light and smoke. Oh, how romantic. I know, yeah. So I wrote this, but then I thought maybe I could go a bit further. So I did talk to her, and I said, could I take some video? And she said, sure, of course. So I put some money in her hat. She was very excited, and more than the guys were giving her on the street. And so then I made a little video. So I tried this little video. We don't have much audio here, so I'm just going to turn up the volume here. Let's see what this looks like. She's whistling as well. You hear her whistling. And that's that, right? Yeah, so interesting. It took me about 15 minutes. And you say, but no, I can't do that. I can't do those videos on things. You don't have to. You don't have to. It's the student's problem, right? And then the students come to you and say, oh, sorry, I don't know how to use the video. And say, oh, not my problem. Talk to another student. Talk to another student. Get somebody else. Do that collaborative learning that we're looking for all the time. Take an opportunity to learn a new skill from somebody else. Again, this is a generation where, because it's their own phones, they'll figure it out. They're technologically very, very savvy, and we don't really have to teach them those sorts of things. Yeah. What's the sixth one? The sixth one is explore different tools on the phone. So there's so many things just on a phone before you buy any apps or get any apps to do anything else. And these are things where you can just get a little bit creative, or again, lazy teacher, ask your students to think about ways to be creative with the tools that are on their phone. These are three of my favorite. This sort of idea of the little calendar here, up at the top, the notepad, and the reminders. I think these work very, very well together in class. Ask students to if there's any assignments due, any tests coming up, any, end of class, things like that. If they have to meet in their groups, get together, do anything else, fantastic. They can put all those into the calendar. But the reminders and the notepad is very interesting. New vocabulary items, put it into your notepad. List it in your notepad. And then take that and put a reminder. Put a reminder for tomorrow. to look at your vocabulary for 3 days, for 7 days, for 2 weeks, for a month. If you're still looking at it a month and you can't remember what the words are, you better start over and close that cycle up and start over again. But it's an opportunity, just again, to turn their phones from something that's a distraction in the classroom into something quite useful in different ways. Here's another tool. Of course, there's so many apps outside, but all of them can be language learning tools in different ways. This is a terrible, terrible one I got in so much trouble about, but it had to do with Skype. What happened? What happened? I've got 2 sons. My older son, Nathan, studying international economics in Vancouver. And so Nathan, I phoned him up one morning, and I said, "Nathan, how are you?" He said, "I'm terrible, terrible. I've got a cold, right?" You know, he's such a baby, right? You know, 6'2", huge guy, but you know, such a baby when he's sick. I said, "Oh, you poor guy." I said, "Well, are you going to class?" He said, No, I'm too sick. I can't go to class." And so I said, "Well, what about Alex? Is Alex going?" You know, because Alex is his best friend, is also in the international economics program. And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, why don't you give Alex your phone and use your laptop at home and just create a Skype connection. That way you can watch the class in real time rather than trying to record the class or do something else," right? "Okay," right? So he gives it to Alex, yeah. So Alex takes it to class, sets it up, everything else, and he's sitting in the front row, and the teacher begins the class. He's talking for a couple minutes, and then he says, "Oh, Alex, where's Nathan today?" You know, because he knows they're good friends. And he says, "Oh, sorry, sir, Nathan's really sick. He decided to stay home today. He didn't want to, you know, come to class, you know, just too sick." He said, "Yeah, but he's watching the class." He said, "What?" "He's watching the class on Skype." He said, "Oh, really? So he can hear me?" He said, "Oh, yeah, he can hear you, sir." He said, "Okay, Nathan, next question." I got so much trouble. He was so surprised. What? Yeah, so anyway. But what does this mean? What does this mean? We can use the phones in the classroom. A student is away, why not? Just say, if you're going to miss a class, okay, set up a class. You set up a little Skype thing, you can watch it, if you've got Wi-Fi available. The last of these 7 ones is, before we go on to talking about efficacy and agency, is the idea of exploring new technologies. And new technologies are coming around all the time, all the time. A big one is augmented reality, where we're placing objects in there. Pokemon is extraordinary. I was trying to find the figures this morning, I think for when airplanes, to get to 50 million people who had taken airplanes, took 67 years. 67 years before we had a total of, from the invention of the airplane until the end. The internet took about 12 years. Computers about the same time to get to 50 million users. Pokemon Go took 19 days to go to 50 million users. So it's kind of an interesting technology, and the rate of adoption is going very, very quickly. Could you do something like this with English? Instead of having little, you know, dancing guys out there, could you have English vocabulary? Could you have something else? Could you use the technology in some interesting ways to put language out there? There's other programs that maybe are even a little bit simpler. And this idea of layered realities, where you pick up a phone and you start annotating things around. The phone uses your global positioning system to position it where you are and to figure out where you are, so somebody else comes with the phone and it puts up all of these labels. Now you imagine in a city like Nagoya, you go to all the tourist attractions and things like that, but you add details, interesting little details in English, and what a great project for your students. You could make it a 10-year project and map the entire city. The students can look at what other students have done, edit it, update it, and add to it in different ways. So it's kind of an interesting sort of thing to do. Virtual reality is also enormously different. How many people have tried virtual reality, gotten the goggles, something like that? A few people? Yeah, it's kind of freaky. I bought them for my kids, and then just a few months ago in Montreal, we went to a video gaming parlor. You know, we were sort of like that, and we had the handles, so we were killing dwarfs and things like that and swinging around. Kind of interesting stuff. The technology, the cost of the technology is going way down. Google Card cardboard. I think costs about, I'm not sure, maybe 1,000 yen or something like that to get these, and so you can just pop your phone into them. They're not the best, but they work. They're pretty good. There's a couple of other things with this that seem quite promising in some ways. This is a woman who is an illustrator, and she actually builds whole worlds. Sorry, no music or anything with this. She's building a ship, and on that ship she's building a little city as well. And she creates all the backgrounds and the landscape and everything else. It's quite wonderful. It's kind of amazing what she's doing there. So you look at this and you think, any new technology, you can say to yourself, and what is the pedagogical application of this? Could I use this in some way? Could I have people sort of painting or creating these worlds or building up worlds in some way? How could I use language to sort of help develop this in some interesting way? The great thing about this, again, always it's digital. It's still there, you know, the day after she walks away. It's there forever. And you can actually go in and you could walk around and explore the entire world yourself. But it doesn't always work out in the same way. And when you talk about virtual reality, again, the pedagogy is extremely important, and we have to be cautious. We don't want to ask students to invest in things that may not work perfectly, and like this one here. So let's see. He's doing some sort of game. I think it involves riding a horse at some point or something there. So he's lost. Oh, he's found his horse. Oh, good. All right, so I look at this one and I imagine 30 students in a classroom all of a sudden falling onto the floor or something like that. So it's a new technology, it's interesting, but just because it's new doesn't mean we adopt it. We have to be a little critical in our thinking to see whether or not it would suit our purposes in some way. Okay, the second part of the talk, I want to talk a little bit about efficacy. Efficacy. So what do we mean by efficacy? Well, we've had several definitions in the presentations already, in the plenaries in different ways. I'd say it's something about being confident to adapt and to innovate in the classroom, having some confidence, some self-confidence in ourselves to try something. Because every student needs to succeed, deserves to succeed. In my first, when I started university, my first day, my first class, Dr. Mackay, Geography 101. 300 students, right, all taking the geography course. So Dr. Mackay, miserable old man, you know, walks in, looks at all of us and, you know, looks at us, he said, first year, well, you know, by Christmas, half of you will drop out. And by the end of the year, maybe a quarter will be left. And then what? And then what? In 4 years, maybe 20 of you will graduate in geography. And 20 years after that, only one of you will be working as a professional geographer. We're crying our eyes out. Everything else. Why would he say that? Why would he say that? It was old thinking, old thinking. The old thinking was sink or swim, sink or swim. And that it had nothing to do with him. Like the whole teaching, you know, everything else about us becoming geographers or learning, paying money to go to university had nothing to do with him. It was just all our problem. And today it's different. Today it's different. We use this metaphor of a doctor. Imagine this at a hospital. So a woman comes into the hospital and says, "Oh, doctor, help me. Oh, what's the matter? What's the matter?" He said, "Oh, the cat scratched my finger," right? "Oh, that's terrible." And then you say, oh, just wait, somebody else coming in. And you look through the other door and there's another guy coming in and he's been in a terrible car accident, right? So both arms broken like this, you know, one leg cut off, blood coming out, eyeball hanging down, right? Yeah. So the question is this, who would the doctor treat first? The cat lady or the automobile accident, right? How many people say the cat lady? One. Okay, good. How many people say you're not allowed to work as a doctor? Okay, you too. Yeah. How many people say the automobile? Yeah, everybody else. Okay. Right. And the second question is, who does the teacher treat? Oh, that might be the cat lady, right? Say, you're so smart. Maybe you'll be a teacher like me someday, right? Yeah, take the other student to the graveyard. Yeah. So quite often what we do is we favor those students who are already quite good, and we tend to ignore sometimes the weakest students. We say they have a bad attitude, or they're not really interested in learning, or they're not performing, or something else. But in the end, it's our problem. It's our problem, so we have to work with that. The lazy teacher, the lazy teacher. Let's go back to this haiku idea that we were talking about earlier. If you look online, take some time, look online, look up how to teach haiku. And there's wonderful, wonderful lesson plans that go on for like 20 pages. Fantastic. First, go to the library and get 20 books on haiku, and then do this, and you know, all these things, and print up certificates. Now you are a haiku poet. I mean, it's incredible the sorts of things that they have. Enormous amounts of work. But a lazy teacher principle shifts responsibility back to the students. If I was teaching haiku, I would say, okay, I want you to learn about haiku. And I want you to figure out how I can assess your knowledge. Like, I don't have to do that. Let the students do that. Let them figure out how they should be assessed. And anything else you should know. This is my lesson plan. This is my lesson plan. This simple. I might show them a poem. I might show them a poem, something like this, or I would ask them, say, go find some haiku. Bring a poem in. Let's look at some. Here's a famous one by Basho. Very confusing for students. It says, in Kyoto, hearing the cuckoo, I long for Kyoto. He's in Kyoto. How can he miss it, right? What does this mean? What's going on here? It's complex. And I love the fact that it's complex because too often we ask students easy questions. And this is a difficult question. What's he talking about? What do we know? Well, the students start to explore some of these things, and we start to get into a schema development of some kind. Talking about Japan, obviously, Kyoto, we've got the idea of haiku, we're going to Basho, what's his biography? Figure it out. Who was he? Poetry, what's the form? It doesn't rhyme, so what makes it a poem if it doesn't rhyme? So we start getting into questions, but students are asking those questions. Get those. They go to a biography, and that's not enough, because that's what we too often do in class. We give them one reading in a unit or in a book. We don't give them multiple ones. Better yet, we don't ask them to go find different ones. So you look at these two biographies, and they're opposite, and they're quite different. You can have the PowerPoint afterwards if you're curious to want to read it all. But this one is very factual, very straightforward, just the facts, please. This was written by a big fan, so, you know, just somebody who loved him. Basho, the poet who crystallized the telegram like stenography, like haiku style, a shorthand way of writing. And so he's very full of praise. So the two side by side promote critical thinking. When you're having two perspectives on the same. So again, just by giving students one biography of Basho, it's boring. The whole idea here, then we start to learn more things. Basho, what was his full name? What were his dates? The family. His education, you learn something about samurai, and Zen is important. Then the whole idea about the occupation, he was a poet and a traveler. And then we get into the haiku styles that he used. So again, just pushing it all onto the students. Be a lazy teacher is giving up the need to be in a teacher-centered environment and moving into a learner-centered environment of some way. So the biggest issue that we have here is always trying to shift responsibility to the students in some way. So the final part of this is the idea of agency. So the third theme here, and the second theme of the conference after efficacy. So agency, again, we kind of have to define this over again. Giving students more responsibility, which has been an entire theme through all of these ideas. It's gone through the technology, it's gone through the efficacy, and now in agency it really, really talks about that. But whereas efficacy is more about the teacher in this particular context, the agency is giving students more responsibility and more personalized choices in their language learning. Again, sculptures from the Art Museum here in Nagoya. New approaches need to move learners toward independence. And how do we do that? Well, you can see the contrast between the ways in which we traditionally teach and the ways in which we learn things on our own. So traditionally, teachers have very limited resources within the classroom. There tends to be a very surface exploration of many of the topics. We have a unit in 1 week, next week we're doing another unit. And students don't get the chance to dig deeper. Learning is the focus, and learning, of course, being the focus, has to be tested. That's really what's going on there. Consider the opposite when somebody learns something on their own. Now, I've spent my life learning how to cook, be a better cook. Not because I want to be a best cook, but because I enjoy eating. Yeah, that's probably it, the main reason. But I have almost unlimited resources. In trying to learn how to cook, I've gone to cooking classes in a dozen different countries. When I travel, particularly with my wife, we often say, let's find a cooking class, and because it's a great cultural experience. I've watched YouTube videos, I watch cooking shows, I buy magazines, I buy cookbooks. I go over to friends' houses and say, listen, I love that. Can you teach me how to make that? Let's make it together. So there's so many different resources that we have that we wouldn't have in the classroom. So deep exploration is extremely common, and I'm spending years learning how to cook or become a better cook, not 1 week of a unit. The learning is a side benefit. I don't expect to be tested. I'm not opening a restaurant. I'm not going to take some exam to become a professional chef. It's just I'm learning for the sake of learning for other things, but it's not really because I want to cook better. I want to cook for my friends and my family, and I want to enjoy food more myself. Personalization is a very big part of all of this. We no longer want every learner to study the same things. So too often we're teaching, just again, expecting everyone to learn the same things, and we are assessing them on the same things. So we teach everything, one unit to everybody. We expect them all to learn everything in the unit. We test them, and then we're judging them whether or not they've gotten it or not. But learners want variations, and they want that variation based on their own needs and their own interests, particularly as they get to the adult level where they see different paths in their lives. When they're very young, of course, they don't know necessarily what they want to do. Even if they think they do, they're probably wrong about it, and they will change their careers throughout their lives. One thing we often do too much of is teach about cultural things to do with other countries rather than cultural things to do with Japan. So you see so often, there's in British books they've got Big Ben on the cover. On American books, the Statue of Liberty, right? So I go to England all the time. I go to New York a couple of times a year, things like that. When I go to New York, people say, "Oh, Ken, where are you from?" "Oh, I'm Canadian. I just moved to Montreal." I said, "Really? Just moved to Montreal? Really? What do you know about the Statue of Liberty?" Right? Nobody ever asks me that. Nobody is ever going to ask me about Big Ben. What they will ask me about is maple syrup, hockey, how cold it is in Montreal, questions like that. And I should be able to articulate those things for myself. I should be able to talk about my job, talk about my background, talk about my family, talk about my food, my history, my culture, my music, all of the things that make me who I am. Those are the personal things. But too often in the textbooks that we teach, we don't have the opportunities to do that. So we have to shift that idea. So find out what students know, what they don't know, and maybe what they think they know but they're wrong about. What do we mean? What do we mean here? Okay, so you ask, so all of you, what's the capital of Egypt? Cairo. Okay, you know what? I'm not going to teach that. You all know it. Fantastic. Or enough of you know it that I don't need to teach it. Second question, what was the name of the last pharaoh of Egypt's cat? Okay, nobody knows. Great. I'm going to put that on tick. I'm going to be teaching that, right? And third question, what was the purpose of the ancient pyramids of Egypt? I know. It was for the alien spacecraft to come and land on. No, that was from a movie, right? So we find out what students know, what they don't know, and what they think they know, but maybe they're wrong about. So we have to explore those things in the class. And again, we've been talking in the plenaries this morning, especially the last one, just now about this whole idea of prior knowledge. Let's tap into the students' prior knowledge and not just assume they don't know anything about the topic. Expertise. One of the problems that we face as teachers is we're expected to be experts on so many different things. I'm ashamed to say I've been expected and pretended to be an expert, often teaching English for special purposes throughout the years. And I remember one time I was teaching in Hong Kong. I lived in Hong Kong for many years. And one of my boss comes to me and says, "Oh, Ken, we've got a new group, nurses, English for nurses. Do you think you could teach English for nursing?" I said, "Oh yeah, no problem," right? So I go down to the bookstore and I pick up, English for nurses, the big textbook, and then I'm all ready, and the first class comes on, and the students come in, and one of them says, "Dr. Beatty, what the hell do you know about nursing?" Yeah. So I think, and I'm looking at my book, I'm looking at the student, I'm looking at my book, I'm looking at the student, and finally I decide, to be honest, I said, "You know what? I don't know anything about nursing, which is why you are going to teach me to become a nurse," right? And they say, "What?" Yeah, I say, "Yeah. Everyone, what I want you to do is in pairs, get into pairs, and each we'll have 2 or 3 pairs each week. I want you to find something to teach me about nursing. So you'll have to research the techniques, and you already know those because you've been in training as nurses, but then you have to be able to do it in English and teach me what you know and do the research." Oh, sir, what if we pick the same topic, right? Not my problem, right? Yeah, so talk to each other. So the next week they come in, the first group comes in. Fantastic. They've got a big bag of oranges and a bag of syringes, because when you're practicing injections, you do it with oranges. So they bring out the oranges, and I'm sticking everywhere and things like that, and they're showing and explaining and talking about what's important and what you do, everything else. The next group of students, they're doing bandages, how to put on bandages for broken arms and things like sprains, and so I lie down on the table and done up like a whole mummy. It was so exciting. So a lot of fun, but there was a few things that were quite special about this. One is that the learners became teachers, and that was great because they had the deep knowledge about the English for special purposes, really. The content, they were the content experts. It shifted responsibility. We keep using this word, responsibility, shift responsibility to the students. So they became peer teachers. And finally, they had access to resources that I didn't. I couldn't go get a syringe. I couldn't go to the pharmacy and say, "Oh yeah, I need 20 syringes," right? Huh? What for? No, you couldn't do that. They had access to all those things, and the bandages and the bedpans and everything else, so they could bring those things in, and it made for a much richer class. So again, shifting that responsibility to students. Also, approaches and materials need to be personally motivating in some way. So we need to shift responsibility so students are much more, the materials themselves are more motivating. If we're using the old books that are maybe not really tailored for this, we run into problems. Now, I've been working on a new series called Startup. It's for adults. It's an 8-level American English series, and it has some remarkable aspects to it. First of all, it comes with an app. What's the point of the app? Don't they have a student book already? And what's that? Sorry, is this a sign? Can I go out with you tonight? Yes, of course. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, love to. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so, okay, so what's the point of the app? So the app goes straight from the page. There's a little QR code in the first 3 lessons, straight to exercises, but it also has every video, every audio, and every, all the videos and all the audios, grammar videos, pronunciation videos. And so how does that work? Well, a few things. First of all, students can preview before they come to class. So again, shifting responsibility. Don't come to class and just expecting that the teacher is an entertainment, like Turn on the Teacher or something like that. The point is for you to come a little bit prepared as well. So you can preview. Afterwards, after we do a lesson, what can you do? You can review the materials. Now, in previewing, you can ask students to look at it, but they'll look at it once, twice, 3 times, 10 times if they're a weak student. A really good student will look at it once and say, "Okay, I've got it." But that's kind of like flipping the learning, something that actually Aviva Ueno and myself were talking about in tomorrow's presentation. But this is an interesting aspect of it, and this is another sort of very unusual thing. In every textbook that you've ever had, that you've used, it's almost always set up the same way. You have a unit. At the end of the unit is a review task, right? A review task that comes at the end of the unit. And it's so depressing, so depressing. You do the whole unit, you're all excited about the topic, everything else, and then you come to this little multiple choice test with 10 items, and those 10 items are, you get 3 out of 10 or 6 out of 10, and what does that mean? What What does that mean? You don't know. Does that mean you should redo the whole unit? Well, the teacher isn't going to say, well, you only got 3, so let's do it again. It never happens. So instead, we go to a kind of a new attitude about getting students to show what they know, and to individualize it and to personalize it. So this is just an example of a task, and you can do this on your own if you like. But what it does is it sets it up. It says it sets it up in a couple of ways. It has a little video to start off with a student doing it. And to get these, for the first 3 levels, we hired 30 non-native speakers of English, just for this part of the book. Why? Because when you are learning a language, when you're learning English, you can't go to somebody and say, oh, hi, how are you? Oh, sorry, I only speak American English, right? You can't do that. 350 million people in the world are native English speakers, but 750 million are non-native speakers of English. So, we always have to talk to different people, and we have to understand accents. Now, we're not testing on the accents, it's just something that's thrown in. It has another advantage, another idea there, and that's the students aren't intimidated, because each of these students has a bit of an accent, so they listen to it and they say, oh, I can do that. In other cases, they will see students from Japan, and so they'll say, oh, that's a Japanese speaker, and they're doing the task as well, because we got students from all over the world. So what do? Well, this guy's talking about clothing, everything else, describes his clothing, makes a little video. It's a subversive task. The students have to do the same thing. They've seen the model, now they go back and they try doing it themselves. But they think they're doing a project. What do? Well, first of all, they have to plan. Okay, so they don't think they're planning, but of course they have to plan. And then they go and do it, and they do it once. They look at it, and they say, that's terrible. And so they go to do it again. So in fact, they're being self-critical. They're editing their work. So what happens then? So they do it a couple more times. It's like a selfie. Nobody takes one selfie. They do it a few times. Finally, they're happy with it. They'll show their family or their friends, and they say, oh, you forgot about your soccer uniform. You should put that in there. Say, yeah, okay. So they go and they do it again. They're getting peer evaluation. Not because you ask them to, but it's just a natural outcome of a task. The task is structured that in order to complete it, they have to use the vocabulary, they have to use the grammar, they have to use the content from the unit in order to do that. So it's a subversive task, and then finally at the end of it, they come to class and they share. So then they're doing a presentation on it as well. Sorry. Now, 2 things about this. One is that it's memorable because they're doing something personal. It's just about themselves. They've created something, and so it's at the upper level of Bloom's taxonomy. So they're evaluating, creating, analyzing, all those things are going on. It's all great. Secondly, it's very motivating because it's all about themselves, so that's good. Assessment media projects allow, again, as I say, students to show what they know. If we just, are always telling students, they end up with questions. But if we start asking questions for students, they come up with ideas. And that's really where we want to move to in agency. So what's the future? We started off with this whole idea of a time machine. What's the future going to look like? Well, I think it's kind of going to look like this. In a perfect language learning course, teachers will be very confident, and we'll know what we're doing, we'll have good approaches, and I think that's always happening. It's always improving, and all of you are evidence of this. All of you are giving up your weekend to come to a conference to learn, and I applaud you for that. Eventually, we're going to have tools that will give us a perfect knowledge of students. How is each student different? Instead of just saying a general one, they're a B1 student, or on the global scale of English, they're a 52, something like that. We're going to have much more detail about the students. That has to happen. Eventually, we're going to have individualized learning materials. Every student will have a different book according to their needs, according to their interests. And then there's going to be perfect and continuous assessment. My PhD advisor, David Noonan, comes from humble roots, everything, and he writes very plainly sometimes. My favorite quote from him is, I was reading one of his books, and it said, students not only learn, they also forget. I thought, okay, that's perfect, right? And it's true. So a continuous assessment, not just to figure out, have you mastered this at one point in time 2 years ago, but do you still know it? And that's what we need to know. That's a lot of ideas today. We talked about many different things. Does it sound impossible? Do all of these things seem like, I don't know, I'm not sure if some of those things would work with my students? It's impossible, said pride. Sometimes we're too proud. We've been doing it our own way. We don't want to say we should try it. Sometimes it's risky, said experience. What if it goes wrong? What if it goes wrong? I'll look like foolish in front of the students, you know? It's pointless, said reason. What difference will it really make? Do the students really care? Are they motivated? Give it a try, whispered the heart. Here we are. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thanks. I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 questions before we run up and down the stairs. Yeah, yeah. Anybody? Yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
What company is your book with?
The book is with Pearson. Pearson, thank you for asking. I didn't ask her to say that. Yeah, Pearson. Yeah, so go to the Pearson booth on the 8th floor, and the title of the book, it's an 8-level series, Startup, and it's brand new. It's brand new, and it's packed with ideas for flipped learning, which we'll be talking about tomorrow. This is Aviva Ueno and Amanda, 2 of my graduate students here, and we're going to be presenting about the book a little bit more and some more ideas about flipped learning tomorrow. So otherwise, I'll be at the booth right now if you're curious about the book, and please come and see it. Any other questions? Yeah? I'm sure you're going to wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, I should have asked them that. So please take my email, and if you would like a copy of this presentation, I can send you a PDF, so please don't hesitate. Just write down the email, and I'd be glad to share that with you. Thank you so much for coming today. Thanks. Yeah.